Thanks for being here for this time of Bible study. We continue our discussion in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're getting near the end. We're in chapter 10. So if you will, turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 10 as we continue to look at the instructions that we have here about life, about how to properly view life, especially contrasting the view of life with God or life without God. And as we've been pointing out all through our study, and we've been trying to reference this chart each week as we look at the book of Ecclesiastes, I really think it is critical to understand the immediate context and the broader context in the book, because there's a change of view that goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. One view is the futility and frustration of life if God is not there. If there is no God, life is terrible, really. It's just vexation, vanity, frustration. And that kind of terminology is used over and over again. But then on the other hand, when the context flips and it begins to discuss life with God in the big picture, then life makes sense. Then there's reason. Our existence has purpose if God is in the picture. So again, this flipping back and forth between those two views is really, really important to understand that, because as we've pointed out a lot of times in our study here of Ecclesiastes, there are folks who will take some of the statements in the book of Ecclesiastes and take them out of this context that we just described, and then jump to false conclusions. And we've tried to point that out as we've gone through our study, that if you don't have this understanding of context in mind, you can get really messed up. All right, so we are in chapter 10, and as you look at our chart up here, you see that we're in the final section. Most commentators call them 4 sermons. And each sermon has those 2 parts that we just described. We're in the final section, or the final sermon, the 4th sermon. And we have, Solomon has transitioned into, again, the idea that there is a God and the view of life with God in the picture. We concluded our comments last week with verse 5 and 6. There's an evil which I've seen under the sun, and as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low places. I've seen servants upon horses, and princes walking as servants upon the earth. And so we concluded last week right there, where talk about the fact that people who deserve to be in positions of authority are not. And instead of that, servants are riding on horses while princes have to walk. That's a bad thing. When the undeserving are in positions of authority, that's a tough situation. I'm always intrigued by the fact that this book is on the order of 3,000 years old, and yet it seems like it could have been written in our day and time. And you get the idea that the human condition doesn't change very much. And it's always been the case all through history where really unqualified and undeserving people have been able to acquire positions of even highest authority, and the people suffer when that's the case. But that's not new. It's not. I think we see that in our day and time, but it's not new. We should not believe that this is the first time this has ever happened, that we've got unqualified people directing the affairs of state. No, that's happened a lot. That happens all the time in history. And so Solomon sees it as a frustration. But notice that in this context, we can live with that. It's not pleasant, and it may be bad, but we've got a bigger picture. We can see beyond the immediate frustrations of this kind of an existence, because we understand that there's a God in the picture. All right, let's pick up some new verses beginning at verse 8. I'm in chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes, verse 8. He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Whoso removeth stones shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. If the iron be blunt and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. Surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. All right. It's almost like here, the way this is written almost reminds you of the way the book of Proverbs is written. So, sort of bang, bang truths about just sort of almost random observations. But it's kind of interesting. He's describing, beginning in verse 8, he's describing dangerous kinds of work that one might do. If you dig a pit, you might fall in it. If you break down a hedge, there might be a snake in there that will bite you. If you are cutting stones or quarrying stones, that's what verse 9, whoso removeth stones, could be hurt there. I mean, that's dangerous work, quarrying out stones to build building. You might be hurt by the stones. If you're splitting logs, he who cleaveth wood shall be endangered. You can get hurt. People get hurt a lot, in wood cutting and so forth. So he's basically saying all kinds of work really carry inherent risk, and the wise man anticipates that is so, plans his work accordingly to avoid any injury that might come to him. Real straightforward. Now, it seems to me this is a little bit different writing style or tone than we've seen in the rest of the book, but certainly it's a good lesson to learn. There's inherent risk with things that we do, and if you're not using your head, and if you're not planning carefully, you're likely to be injured by it. That's not limited necessarily just to physical work. Here he mentions different kinds of physical activity, but it may not just be physical activity. You can cause hurt to yourself. If you've got a desk job, if you're not prudent in the way you deal with the things you have to deal with on your job, it could come back to get you. It could come back to bite you, as they say. So I had this desk job, but I wasn't being very diligent about it, and I wasn't being careful about what I said to who I said it. And boy, that came back and got me. I got fired from that job because my boss heard that I had said to another coworker that I didn't think he would, see that? No wisdom if you do that. So really, all kinds of activity possess inherent dangers. You got to be smart. You got to plan your work to avoid those kind of things. Tom?
A lot of things, even like test taking sometimes. A lot of times it's multiple choice. I remember one time taking a test and got a little bit in a hurry, and I just skewed over one column. Well, all the answers I wrote down were in the wrong column, and you were timed, and then you had to go back and erase and change it over, and you didn't finish the test. So you didn't get the grade that you should have gotten, even though you knew all the answers. Yeah. Just a little bit of negligence, in doing things. So it's sort of that concept of being aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
You could
plan and taking all and considering all things and planning.
Yeah. It's like, sometimes walking up steps, you think you're not paying attention. You might think that you've got another step and you don't, and you stumble, or you think that you're up all the way and you don't, and you trip over the top step.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just get ahead of ourselves in what we do.
Yeah. Now, obviously, all of these kind of considerations are certainly applicable to our this world kind of endeavors, but if we're wise, we make application of this in our spiritual lives most of all. So, if I do this, I'm going to put myself in spiritual peril in that way. If I do that, I'm going to endanger my soul in this way. So, certainly he's talking about physical activities, but I believe he's in the context zone wherein he's talking about God. And so, when I'm making choices, I need to think about how that might impact my soul and the danger that might come to me spiritually because I'm engaging in this activity without caution. So I'm hanging out with certain friends who are not very godly people. And they have in the past tempted me to do things that I shouldn't do. I'm thinking about going out with them again. Really? You're thinking about going out with the very people who caused you to engage in sinful activity the last time you were with them? Where's your brains? Where's your planning? Where's your wisdom? Wisdom says avoid that, right? Just like you want to be careful when you're chopping wood, be careful when you're with those people. They have hurt you before. Don't let them hurt you again. Monty.
Also, Timothy to flee lust. We're taught in the New Testament various ways that we're supposed to avoid temptation and flee from it. Well, if I'm going out with those friends and hanging out with them, I'm not fleeing temptation. I'm jumping right into the middle of it and knowing up front that it's going to be that way. And I think sometimes we've got the foolish idea, well, we'll be a good influence on them, we'll change them. Possibly, but not likely. But we've got to make sure we're a strong person first. And if I'm a strong person, then I'm not making it my habit to go hang out with sinful people. And if I'm going to be with them, I need to make sure it's for the purpose of teaching them, not just to go and socialize.
Okay, I think you're right. And so we're trying to make, an important spiritual application of the simple physical notions that are set forth in those verses. I like verse 10 because I have learned this lesson well. If the iron be blunt and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. Now again, that one has a real easy physical application. Those of us who cut firewood, and you have learned, like I have probably, that you're better off to take 10 or 15 minutes and sharpen your chainsaw chain before you go to the field to cut wood. Because if you don't, it will cost you way more than that 15 minutes, and you're going to have to work a lot harder because the chain is dull and it won't cut. And you're going to have to exert a lot more effort to get it through, to cut through the logs. Take the time, make the preparation. It'll save you in the long run. But again, I think, obviously, again, that has practical physical application, but think about the application of that spiritually. If I'm not taking precautions and if I'm not planning myself in my spiritual work, it will make it harder on me. Verse 11 is interesting. He says, surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. That one is kind of hard. But I think in the context of this, again, the idea is it's too late. After the snake has already bitten you, it's too late to call the snake charmer. This is real foreign to us. I'm going to stay as far away from the snakes as I can. But the point of this is if you were in the vicinity of a snake, you might call someone. Here he's called a charmer or an enchanter. We would call it a snake expert. No use calling the snake expert to handle this situation. If the snake has already bitten you, it's too late to make any plans. The point of that in this context is make your plans ahead of time to avoid the snake. Then, if you wait till the snake is already on you and bitten you, it's too late to do much good about it. But I think we get ourselves in that kind of predicament a lot, by my foolishness, by my lack of wisdom, by my failure to plan, I get myself in these terrible situations. And then, of course, it's a nightmare trying to work my way out of that. How much better it would be to avoid that ahead of time. I think we really got to do that physically, especially spiritually. We've got to do that sort of thing. Thoughts or comments to anybody? All right. Again, the whole sense of that is plan ahead, physically, especially spiritually. All right, let's read a little bit. Wait.
As one version says, if the snake should bite before it is charmed, the snake charmer is in trouble.
Yeah. He can't do much about that. Yeah, exactly right. All right. Let's keep reading at verse 12. I'm in chapter 10 at verse 12. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be, and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? The labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. All right, this seems to all be addressed to the foolish person. Again, contextually, the guy who's not using his head, planning ahead, avoiding pitfalls of life. And here he specifically talks about the words of a fool. Verse 12, his words are self-destructive. Verse 13, from the beginning to the end. He starts talking foolishly and he continues. Everything he says is foolish from start to finish. Verse 14, he talks too much about things that he doesn't know about. The King James wording there's a little strained, I think, but I believe the idea of verse 14 is he's talking about stuff that he doesn't even know about. And then verse 15, his words weary him and everybody else who are around him. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't even know the way to town. What would be something that anybody should know? Well, I know how to get. I know how to go to town. I have to go to town to get necessities. This guy is so silly. He doesn't even know the way to town. And so all of that is a description of this foolish man. And certainly, I think it is appropriate for us to consider those sorts of things. I know that you have been around people who probably almost perfectly fit the description that is given there of the foolish man and his words. Again, he destroys himself with his words. He talks too much. Everything he says is foolish. He talks about things he doesn't know anything about. And the words of a fool actually expose him. They reveal that he doesn't have wisdom by the things that he does, to the point that that guy doesn't have enough. Here he says he doesn't have enough sense to even make it to town. We might use an expression, I think maybe a more common expression, where he doesn't have enough sense to come in out of the rain. That sort of thing. That's what he's talking about here. Now, be careful here, because what we want to do is say, yeah, I know people like that. Yeah, I'm aware of people who be careful that that's not describing us. Maybe I'm described there. Maybe to varying degrees, I'm like that foolish man who talks too much, doesn't make any good sense of anything he has to say, talks about things I don't know anything about, and I weary myself and others with the words I say. So be careful when we read these kind of proverbial expressions in the Word of God to say, yeah, I believe that's right. I can see how that applies to other people. Make sure that we're making first application to ourselves in those regards. Anybody? Thoughts here? Monty?
We see a lot of examples in the New Testament with the Jewish leaders tended to do that. They, just like the Pharisee and the tax collector in their prayers, Jesus commented about this. Pharisee thought he was the one who had his act together, and how lucky he was that he wasn't like that tax collector, where the tax collector just said, God, please have mercy on me, a sinner. Well, if we're not careful, we get to think, well, we go to church and we study the Bible and all this, and we're in a highly superior moral position to everybody else, when we're really ultimately not any different. We've all sinned and fallen short
Yeah.
I think that's right. I might make a point to you young guys to think about, just relate an experience that I had some time back. And so this young man was corresponding about the question of social drinking, about drinking alcohol. And in a letter, he said, I've studied this subject rather thoroughly, and I've come to the conclusion that the Bible does not condemn social drinking. You know how I answered him back? I wrote a letter back to him. I said, I've studied this rather extensively myself. But so have lots of other people smarter than you or me for centuries. This young man was suggesting that I have discovered some truth in this matter that others have not discovered. I'm going to tell you, we are always off base if we believe that we have discovered some new element of truth that no one else ever thought of. Really smart people and faithful brethren have studied the Scriptures for centuries. There is no new truth to be mined. And so don't be so foolish as to imagine that you figured something out that nobody else ever figured out. I think that's the words of a fool who says something like that. Now, we can talk about a question like social drinking, and we can consider the proofs in the Word of God that I think are very definite, that we are to avoid intoxicating drink completely and entirely. We can talk about that. We can debate those things. But do not come and say, I'm smarter. I'm more enlightened than anybody else who ever went before me. That's just not true. It couldn't possibly be true. And those are the words of a foolish person who would say something like that. So again, our words expose us. Our words let people identify whether we're wise or foolish in large portion by our words. So let's just be careful with our words. Thoughts or comments about this? All right. Verse 16. Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child and thy princes eat in the morning. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles and thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. Again, this whole section just sort of like, quick proverbial kind of observations. Why is it a woe on the land when the king is a child? Monty?
He's talking about this here, and he's using the word child, but it's not necessarily referring to a preteen person or something like that. I think he's talking about an immature person, a person that's not a mature leader, because if someone's immature or they're not being a good leader, as he's talking about here, they're feasting in the morning. They're just having a blowout party all the time. They're not concerned about taking care of business, about leading the people properly, finding out the best ways to do things like that. They're just concerned about their own pleasures.
I think you're exactly right. So when the king is a child, or as Monty says, an immature person, he's foolish, he's irresponsible, he doesn't have any experience in doing the things that need to be done. The nation will suffer when the child is a king. And then he says, when the princes eat in the morning. And I think that goes to what Monty was saying there too. The idea there is that this denotes a situation where the nobles spend the better part of the day in lazy, gluttonous ways, neglecting the affairs of state. So notice, it has to be significant. He says, the princes eat in the morning. In other words, they start their partying early in the day. They party all day. They never get around to the serious business at hand. That's bad. That's the land will suffer. He says, blessed art thou, O land, when the king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. So the when the king is the son of nobles, the idea of that is he's been brought up understanding these very serious responsibility. He's been trained in how to conduct the important business of state. And the nobles, they eat, but they just eat when they're hungry. They're not just constantly interested in having a party. They eat for strength, not for drunkenness. And so, again, they discipline themselves to take care of the business at hand, which is important. All right, Tom?
I wonder if Solomon was talking about himself there a little bit. Maybe he's recognizing that being the son of David, David tried to instruct him in the way to run his kingdom and listen to God and things like that. Yet Solomon probably neglected his son, and we see Rehoboam, which was his son, came through and did a lot of the foolish things that talked about here.
Yeah, well, yes, and to varying degree. Of course, I wonder when he talks in those kind of terms if he might have been, he had some experience. For instance, he was fully aware of what Absalom tried to do in overthrowing his father David. And so, again, there would be some connection with reality here to these things that he's saying. All right. Yeah.
I think if you read this passage as an application to us, and we're not likely to ever be kings or presidents or what like that. Most of us probably won't even make governor or anything like that. But the point is, we need to behave ourselves in a mature fashion. We need to focus ourselves on doing things at the proper time and doing things with wisdom and planning, rather than just, like it says here, that feast in the morning. Rather than worry about consuming our life on our pleasures, we need to be a disciplined type people here. If it works for the king to be a disciplined person and do things in an orderly way, then it'll work for us too. So we don't need to just pass that passage over. Well, I'm not even going to be the king, so it don't matter. No, there's lessons for me here too. I need to conduct myself like he said the king should conduct himself.
Okay, I think that's really a good observation. So you get Bonnie's point. Oh yeah, well, I'm not a king and I'll never be a king. This doesn't apply to me. No, what he's saying does apply to us in whatever endeavors we're in. And in other words, don't be so just constantly worried about having a good time. There's business to take care of. You got business in your life. I got business in my life. And we shouldn't just always be concerned about fun, having a good time, or parties. Take care of business. Well, that's really good advice. Very sound advice. All right, he says, and then I actually think this continues to the end of the chapter. By much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house droppeth through. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought. Curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry thy voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. I actually think, although I don't know how your Bible is printed, whoever printed my Bible suggested these as distinct separate paragraphs. I think it's all in the context of the king and having a wise king instead of a lazy king. And I think that's who he's talking about in verse 18 when he says, through much slothfulness or laziness, the building decayeth. I think he's talking about the building of state, the nation. Through idleness of the hands, the house droppeth through. That's true in all matters, but I think he's still talking about the king. You got a lazy king who doesn't take care of business. Those things are going to suffer as a result of that. Verse 19, a feast is made for laughter, wine maketh merry, but money. I think he's talking about tax money. So here's this lazy king who's not taking care of business. Things are suffering. What's the answer? More tax money. Get more money. Money answers everything. You ever known politicians to have that viewpoint? Obviously, yes, right? So they're not careful in the affairs of state. What's their answer to that? Raise taxes. Well, that's not new, right? So I really think that that's all still in that context of the king, the unqualified king. You know, really that goes, the observations of that go all the way back in the chapter to verses 6 and 7. I think he sort of starts talking that way. Again, almost timeless. It seems like he could be talking about politics in our day and time. Wait.
There's just a note or reference in this Bible that says, or they think that money is the answer for everything.
Yeah. And that's what politicians do, and I'm sure the kings did that too. But you know, Solomon himself was known for his heavy taxation of the people. Remember when Rehoboam, his son, came to power, when he sought counsel from the old men, they said, lighten the tax load and people will follow you. But his young advisor said, man, lay it on thicker. And he followed the advice of the young people. The kingdom split. And so, you know, yeah, this is sort of timeless conduct of unqualified leaders to do that sort of thing. So what do we do then in response to all of this, the notion of unqualified civil leaders who are causing us a lot of trouble, ruining our affairs of state? The nation suffers. What do we do? It's hard. Verse 20, curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air will carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. It's just really hard, isn't it? I think it's especially hard for us because we live in a place where, at least for the time being, we have the constitutional right to freedom of speech. And if I want to criticize the civil government or any part of the civil government, any member of the civil government, I'm at liberty to do that. I think we've got to be careful, though, because we know, not just here, but we know that other places in Scripture tell us to honor the king, you know, be obedient to civil authorities and so forth. It's hard. It's hard. But I take this instruction personally because I think I need more caution in this regard. The matter will be found out, he says. You know, a little bird will go tell the king that you've been criticizing him. Well, I mean, our positions, you know my positions on political questions. I know, in large measure, I know your positions on political. We're known. Our political viewpoints get out there, don't they? So, again, be careful. Tom?
That goes on. Back in World War II, it was saying, it said, loose lips sink ships.
Yeah.
The concept is, you start telling where your family is, stationed or what ship they're on or whatever. Somehow that'll get back to the enemy, and and it happens. I mean, sometimes with things that we think, we might tell somebody something in confidence, and inadvertently they tell maybe a family member, and then that family member doesn't know it's told in confidence, and it gets back, and the next thing you know,
Everybody knows.
It's all over the place.
Yeah. I think in particular, one of the things that we have new threats in regards to our grumblings being made public, because now if we put it out there in social media or on the internet, people are watching. People are watching. I've used the example before, if I get online to look for a new fishing pole, then pop-up ads for fishing poles start showing up on my computer when I haven't even asked for them. You think people are not watching what I'm doing on the internet? Yeah, there's observation taking place. And it could get worse instead of better. And so, just be careful. Here's the thing, though. And I think this is the key to this. The thing is, what the king is doing, what our civil governors are doing, that's not the most important thing. So what am I known for? Am I known for being a political activist? Or am I known for being a servant of God? So again, you get the idea that these problems with civil government are timeless. They always have been so. They're going to continue to be so. But the one thing that's ultimately important is whether I'm faithfully serving God. Wade?
No, I was just going to say, sometimes you're just talking around your computer and you get an ad that comes up that says, did you like a fishing pole? You was talking about fishing. And I mean, they got it so good now, they're hearing what we're saying.
Oh, wow. It's scary. It's scary how much we probably are being observed. But, again, take it to heart. We want to be careful in all things. And I believe that's the message here of this context. All right. Any thoughts or comments through the end of chapter 10? Anybody? All right. So we start into chapter 11. But you notice where we are in our chart here. We're still in this last part of the last sermon. And I believe we will begin to see quite clearly that Solomon's tone here involves God in the perspective. Verse 1, chapter 11, verse 1, cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8. For thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if the tree fall toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. He that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. As thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child, even so thou knowest not the works of God, who maketh all. In the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thine hand. For thou knowest not whether shall prosper either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. All right, there's some really sort of famous phrases in this section that we just read. And verse 1 is often repeated. Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. What does that mean anyway? Cast thy bread upon the waters. Well, there's a couple of meanings that are assigned to this. I could probably go either way. One way that these verses are applied has to do with the idea of being benevolent, kind toward those who are in need. So if that's the case, then casting your bread upon the waters means sharing your abundance with others. And then verse 2 would be seen in the same way. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8. So if the idea is specifically of doing benevolent good works, helping other people, then verse 2 would be help lots of different people. Don't look at this in a limited way. Be as generous as you possibly can. And there may even be significance to those numbers 7 and 8. Biblically, 7 is a number denoting fullness or completeness. He's saying, and that phrase may mean, don't think that you've ever done enough. Don't think I've given my 7. I've completed my responsibilities in doing good. No, give to 7, give to 8, start over again. So the idea of that would be, if his specific notion there is to be benevolent or helpful to the poor, don't ever imagine that you have finished that work. There will always be poor people to help. Keep looking for those opportunities. If I was pressed, I might lean in that direction of that understanding. Some people think it has a more general application, and the idea being in verse 1, you don't know the future, trust God, keep working. And then verse 2, as you continue your efforts, don't put all, as we sometimes say, don't put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to the work that you're doing. So some people see verse 1 as being just sort of the general idea of, you don't know the future, therefore you need to keep busy. And verse 2 would be, don't put all your eggs in one basket because you don't know what the future will hold. Sort of be diverse in the efforts that you're putting forth. So you can read after commentators who might suggest either. I kind of tend toward the first idea that he's talking about doing good to others, being benevolently minded. Tom?
Second concept, most financial planners tell you, don't invest heavily in one thing. Spread it out, have some aggressive, have some, conservative, have something in between, have some stocks, have some mutual funds, have some commodities, some, other. But have it diversified so no matter where the market goes, at least you're sort of stayed balanced and
So
you're not wiped out.
diversify, as they say. Yeah. Wade?
Yeah, this guy said that he thinks that the word grain there is used as metonymy. And it's not actually meaning grain, but it could be other products and stuff.
In verse 3?
In verse 1.
Oh, in verse 1.
Right there where it says, send your grain. What does your version say?
Cast thy bread upon the water. Yeah.
So maybe bread there, maybe metonymy, just using that to symbolize something.
Yeah, I think it does. It's in other words, he's not saying literally throw bread on the water. He's saying, but spread the good that you have. Yeah. All right. So then, in verse 3, if the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth, and if the tree fall toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. I think here he's saying there's some things that are not going to be within your control. So, you can't control the weather. You can't control the effects of physical nature. Have you ever cut a tree and it fell the wrong way from what you had planned for it to do? Well, it's a done deal then. I mean, you cut the tree and it fell to the north and you meant it to fall toward the south. Too bad, because you're not moving it now. You're not going to be able to make it fall back the other way after it's already fallen. And so I think he's saying there, some things are beyond your control. You're not going to be able to control the forces of nature, or there's just some things you can't do. Therefore, you got to work within the limitations. The whole idea here is doing good and working, and you have to do that with understood limitations. Again, you can't control the weather, but the guy who observes the wind will not sow. I can't plant my field today. The weather's not fit. Well, it may not get perfect. That being the case, I need to go ahead and do what I can when I can. There's some clouds. It might rain today. I better not go out and try to reap my harvest today. Well, it may or may not. I can't control the weather, and when I have opportunity, I need to do good. I think that's the point here. When you have opportunity, do good, because you can't predict the future and you can't change things. All things are not in your power to control. Do what good you can while you can. All right, we got a few more thoughts there in those verses, and we will pick up the discussion there next week, Lord willing, and we're rapidly heading to a conclusion here in our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Thanks, everybody.